Hey there, and welcome to Crime for Sleep. I know you're having trouble falling asleep, so let me keep you company with true crime stories from around the world. Before we dive in, I'm curious, where did you first hear this one? If you enjoy these stories, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Now get comfortable, and let's get into tonight's case. Story 1. The blades above me had been spinning lazily as I sat, eyes fixed on the worn armchair across the room. The soft rustle of air was the only motion in a space otherwise frozen in a muted vigil. Dust motes floated under the static light, drifting aimlessly. A creaking floorboard occasionally whispered beneath unseen weight, but I stayed in place, unsure of its origin. A chill settled in the corners, tracing a path that felt too deliberate for the silence. It wasn't until the fan halted mid-turn, its shadow immobile against the ceiling, that I realized something else had shifted in the stillness. The nausea comes first, always, a rolling, persistent thing that sits just beneath my ribs like a stone I swallowed and can't digest. It's been there for weeks now, maybe longer. Time has this way of folding in on itself when you're trying not to remember something. The taste of copper fills my mouth, metallic and wrong, though I haven't bitten my tongue or tasted blood, not recently. I close my eyes and the armchair is still there, imprinted on my retinas like a photograph burned into film. The fabric was blue once, I think, navy or midnight. Now it's the color of old bruises, purple-gray in the dim light that never seems bright enough anymore. Someone used to sit there. The cushions still hold their shape, indented with the memory of weight of presence. My hands won't stop shaking. There was a conversation. I remember fragments of it like broken glass scattered across a floor I'm afraid to walk on barefoot. Words that didn't make sense then and make even less sense now. Something about choices, about consequences, about how some things can't be undone once they're set in motion. The voice was familiar, too familiar. It belonged to someone I trusted, someone whose opinion mattered more than my own survival instinct. That should have been my first warning, but I was young then. Younger in ways that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with the particular kind of blindness that comes from wanting to believe in someone so desperately that you ignore the evidence of your own senses. The floor beneath my feet feels unsteady, as if the house itself is shifting. I know this sensation. It's the same feeling I had that night, standing in the doorway watching something I shouldn't have been watching, understanding something I wish I could unknow. There was a briefcase, leather expensive looking with brass corners that caught the light. It sat on the coffee table between us like a third presence in the room, silent but somehow accusatory. I never saw what was inside it. Part of me is grateful for that small mercy, but another part, the part that wakes me up at 3 a.m. with my heart hammering against my ribs, wonders if knowing would be easier than this endless speculation. The not knowing is its own kind of torture. I remember the sound of paper rustling, documents maybe, or photographs. The person in the chair handled them carefully, reverently, like they were precious or dangerous or both. Their fingers were steady while mine trembled. I wanted to ask questions, but found myself unable to form words. The air in the room had grown thick, oppressive, charged with the kind of tension that precedes lightning strikes. My reflection stares back at me from the dark window, pale and hollow-eyed. I look like someone who's been carrying a secret too heavy for their bones. The weight of it has changed my posture, curved my spine, made me smaller. I used to stand straight. I used to look people in the eye when they spoke to me. The phone call came first. That's how it started, though I didn't understand then that it was a beginning rather than an end. The voice on the other end was calm, measured, speaking in the kind of code that sounds like normal conversation unless you're listening for the spaces between words. I was told to come alone. I was told not to mention the call to anyone. I was told that my cooperation would be appreciated and my silence would be rewarded. I should have hung up, should have pretended it was a wrong number, a mistake, a misunderstanding that had nothing to do with me. But the voice knew things, personal things, details about my life that no stranger should have possessed. It was like being watched through a window you didn't know existed. The drive there felt endless and too short at the same time. My hands left damp prints on the steering wheel. The radio played songs I didn't recognize, voices singing about love and loss and redemption while I navigated streets that seemed to twist and turn in ways that defied the map I carried in my head. I got lost twice, found myself circling the same block like a moth around a flame, drawn to something that would surely burn me. The house, when I finally found it, looked ordinary, suburban, the kind of place where families lived quiet lives behind closed doors. There was a garden in front, well maintained, with flowers I couldn't name blooming in neat rows. A sprinkler system had left the grass damp and green. Everything about it screamed normalcy, which somehow made it more frightening than any haunted mansion could have been. The person who answered the door smiled at me like we were old friends, like this was a social call instead of whatever it actually was. They offered me coffee, asked about my drive, commented on the weather with the kind of practiced small talk that fills space while bigger conversations wait in the wings. I accepted the coffee, though my stomach was already churning. It gave my hand something to do. We sat in that living room, me on the couch, them in the blue armchair that now haunts my dreams. The briefcase appeared as if from nowhere, though they must have brought it from another room while I was distracted by the photographs on the mantelpiece. Family pictures, mostly. Faces I didn't recognize smiling at cameras held by people I'd never meet. A whole life displayed in frames, normal and warm, and completely at odds with the cold dread settling in my chest. The coffee tasted bitter. I wondered if there was something in it, some chemical designed to make me compliant, but my thoughts remained sharp even as my body grew heavy. Perhaps it was just fear, that particular paralysis that comes from understanding you've walked into a trap of your own making. They opened the briefcase with deliberate ceremony. The latches clicked like bones snapping. Inside, I caught glimpses of manila folders, white envelopes, what might have been a small recording device. Everything organized with the precision of someone who'd done this before, many times before. The first photograph slid across the coffee table toward me like a playing card being dealt. I didn't want to look at it, but my eyes seemed to move of their own accord. It showed a place I recognized, a moment I'd tried to forget. The angle was wrong, though, too high, too distant, as if taken from a building across the street or a window several floors up. Someone had been watching, someone had been recording. My mouth went dry. More photographs followed, a sequence of events I remembered differently, captured by an observer I'd never noticed. In my memory, I'd been alone. These images suggested otherwise. They showed shadows where there should have been empty space, figures where I remembered solitude. Either my recollection was faulty or these pictures were lies. Both possibilities terrified me. The person in the armchair watched my face as I processed what I was seeing. They seemed to be studying my reactions, cataloging them for some future purpose. Their expression remained neutral, professional, like a doctor delivering a diagnosis or a lawyer presenting evidence. This was business to them, just another transaction in a ledger I couldn't read. They began to speak about favors, about mutual benefit, about the importance of discretion and the value of cooperation. The words washed over me like water, meaning and intention slipping away before I could grasp them fully. I understood the general shape of what was being proposed without comprehending the specific details. Plausible deniability, I suppose. A way for both of us to pretend this conversation was about something else entirely. I found myself nodding, though I'm not sure what I was agreeing to. The gesture seemed to satisfy them. They gathered up the photographs with the same care they'd used to display them, sliding them back into their folders like secrets returning to darkness. The briefcase closed with a sound like a coffin lid settling into place. The handshake that followed felt like sealing a contract I'd never read. Their palm was warm and dry while mine was slick with perspiration. They smiled again, that same friendly expression that had greeted me at the door, as if we just concluded a pleasant chat about gardening or the weather. I don't remember leaving. One moment I was standing in that living room. The next I was sitting in my car in the driveway, keys in my hand. No clear memory of the transition between those two states. The house looked the same as when I'd arrived, peaceful and ordinary, and completely innocent of whatever had just transpired within its walls. The drive home passed in a blur of traffic lights and stop signs, my body operating on autopilot while my mind struggled to process what had happened. I kept checking my rearview mirror, expecting to see the same car following me for miles, but the vehicles behind me changed with normal randomness. No one was pursuing me. No one needed to. I was already caught. The nausea that started that night has never fully left me. It comes in waves now, triggered by unexpected things. The sound of briefcase latches clicking, the sight of manila folders, the particular shade of blue that armchair used to be before time and circumstance faded it to something uglier. I've tried to convince myself that nothing really happened, that the photographs could have been doctored, the conversation misunderstood, the entire encounter some elaborate misunderstanding that will resolve itself if I just wait long enough. But the phone calls continue. Not often, just frequently enough to remind me that I'm still tethered to that moment, that decision, that handshake that bound me to something I don't fully understand. The favors they ask for seem small at first, information that appears harmless, observations that feel like casual curiosity, tasks that could be explained away as coincidence if anyone ever thought to ask. But I can see the pattern now, the way these small threads weave together into something larger and more complex than I'd initially realized. I am part of something now, a cog in a machine whose purpose remains hidden from me. I perform my function without understanding the mechanism, contribute to outcomes I may never witness, enable consequences that ripple outward in directions I can't predict or control. The worst part is the isolation. I can't discuss this with anyone, can't seek advice or comfort or even acknowledgement that this burden exists. The secret has become a wall between me and everyone else in my life. I sit in conversations, smile at appropriate moments, respond to questions about my day, all while carrying this weight that no one else can see. Sometimes I catch myself staring at people and wondering if they're like me, if they've had their own encounters with briefcases and photographs and handshakes that change everything, if they're performing their own small functions in service of the same invisible machine. The thought should be comforting, the idea that I'm not alone in this, but instead it fills me with a deeper dread. How many of us are there? How long has this been going on? What are we all contributing to, unknowingly and unwillingly? I've considered going to the authorities, but with what evidence? The photographs are gone. The briefcase has vanished. The house, when I drove past it weeks later, showed a for sale sign on the lawn and windows dark with absence. Even if I could prove the encounter happened, what crime would I be reporting? A conversation, a handshake, the exchange of information that might or might not have been significant. And there's another consideration, one that keeps me awake at night staring at ceiling fans that no longer spin. What if the authorities already know? What if some of them are part of this same network, performing their own functions, keeping their own secrets? What if my attempt to seek help would only draw more attention to my existence, make me more valuable or more dangerous to people who seem to have unlimited patience and very long memories? The paranoia is exhausting. It colors every interaction, makes me question every coincidence, transforms innocent encounters into potential threats. I see surveillance in security cameras, conspiracy in casual questions, manipulation in friendly gestures. The world has become a place where nothing is quite what it seems, and everyone might be playing a game whose rules I don't understand. But perhaps that's the point. Perhaps the paranoia is the real product, the intended outcome of that encounter in the blue armchair. Maybe they don't need me to do anything specific. Maybe my value lies simply in being afraid, in being isolated, in being diminished by secrets I can't share and suspicions I can't voice. If so, they've succeeded beyond their wildest expectations. I sit here now in my own living room, staring at my own empty chairs, and I can feel their presence like a weight on my chest. Not literally, I don't think anyone is watching me at this moment, but metaphorically, spiritually. They exist in my thoughts now, permanent residents in the space where peace used to live. The ceiling fan has stopped spinning, though I don't remember turning it off. The silence it leaves behind feels deliberate, pregnant with meaning I'm afraid to interpret. In that stillness, I can almost hear the echo of that conversation, those careful words that bound me to this existence of half-truths and quarter confessions. I wonder if this is how it ends for people like me, not with dramatic confrontations or explosive revelations, but with this gradual erosion of certainty, this slow dissolution of the boundary between reality and suspicion. We become ghosts haunting our own lives, present but not really there, participating but never truly engaged. The armchair across from me remains empty, but I can see the indentation where someone might sit, where someone might be sitting right now, invisible but undeniably present, watching me write these words, cataloging my thoughts, adding them to some file that bears my name in a briefcase I'll never see again. The taste of copper returns to my mouth, stronger now, almost overwhelming. My hands have resumed their trembling, and somewhere in the distance, so faint I might be imagining it, I hear the sound of footsteps on a floor that should be empty, approaching a door I thought was locked. The fan blade casts its motionless shadow across the ceiling like a finger pointing towards something I don't want to see. But I look anyway, because that's what people like me do now. We look at things we shouldn't look at. We know things we shouldn't know. We carry weights we were never meant to bear. And we wait for the next phone call, the next favor, the next small contribution to a cause that remains forever hidden in shadows that grow longer with each passing moment. Story 2. The aroma of lavender hit me as soon as I stepped through the entryway. Its presence shouldn't be here, not in this place filled with must and fading wallpaper. The scent clung to the air, familiar yet unsettling, wrapping around me like a question. I sought its source, but the room resisted my scrutiny, offering only dust and silence. Each breath of lavender seemed to pull me deeper into a memory I couldn't fully recall, a sunlit field, an unseen hand brushing against my own. My pulse quickened with each inhalation, a rhythm out of sync with reality. I hadn't encountered this scent since the day everything changed. I think I was wearing the blue shirt, or maybe it was green. Details blur when you're trying to reconstruct something your mind doesn't want you to remember. The fabric felt rough against my skin, I know that much. Synthetic, cheap. The woman at the counter had been humming, something soft, melodic. Her fingers drummed against the wooden surface while she waited for me to speak. I opened my mouth, but no words came. Behind her, shelves lined the wall, filled with bottles and jars I couldn't quite make out. The light was wrong somehow. too bright in some places, too dark in others. "Can I help you?" she had asked, or maybe I imagined she asked. Her voice carried that particular quality voices have when they're echoing from somewhere deep inside your skull. I was looking for something, someone. The reason escapes me now, slipping away like water through cupped hands. But I remember the urgency, the way my chest felt tight with purpose I couldn't name. The floorboards creaked beneath my feet as I moved deeper into the space. Each step seemed to echo not just in the room, but in some hollow chamber inside my own head. The lavender grew stronger, more insistent. There was a door, I'm certain of that, painted white, but the paint was peeling in places, revealing something darker underneath. The handle was brass, tarnished with age and countless hands. I reached for it, then stopped. Something held me back, fear maybe, or wisdom. The humming had stopped. I turned around, but the woman wasn't there anymore. Had she ever been there? The counter remained, scarred wood bearing the marks of years, but empty now. The bottles on the shelves seemed to have rearranged themselves while I wasn't looking, or perhaps I was seeing them from a different angle. My reflection caught in the window glass, but it looked wrong, distorted. The face staring back at me belonged to someone I used to know, but had somehow forgotten how to be. The blue shirt, definitely blue. I remember because it reminded me of the sky that day, the way it stretched endlessly above the field where the lavender grew wild. Someone had been with me there. Their shadow fell across mine, creating shapes I couldn't interpret. They spoke my name, but the sound got lost in the wind. "You shouldn't be here," they had said. Or maybe that was someone else, in some other fragment of memory that refuses to stay in its proper place. I found myself standing before the white door again, though I couldn't remember walking back to it. My hand was already on the handle, the metal warm against my palm as if someone else had been touching it moments before. The door opened without resistance, revealing a narrow hallway that stretched further than the building should have allowed. The walls were lined with photographs, but every time I tried to focus on one, it seemed to shift and blur. Faces became landscapes. Landscapes became abstract patterns that made my eyes water. I walked forward anyway, drawn by something I couldn't name. At the end of the hall, another door. This one was different, newer. The kind you might find in an office building or a medical facility. It had a small window set at eye level, but the glass was frosted, revealing nothing of what lay beyond. I pressed my ear to the door and listened. Silence, then, faintly, the sound of humming. The same melody the woman at the counter had been singing, or had I imagined that too? The handle turned easily in my hand. Inside, the room was smaller than I expected. Sterile, white walls, white floor, white ceiling. A single chair sat in the center, facing away from me. Someone was sitting in it, their head visible above the backrest, dark hair streaked with silver. "I've been waiting," they said without turning around. I knew that voice. It belonged to the shadow in the field, to the person whose hand had brushed against mine in that sunlit place where lavender grew wild and time moved differently. Waiting for what? I asked, though I was afraid of the answer. They didn't respond. Instead, they began to hum. The same melody, soft and haunting. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, filling the white room until there was no space left for anything else. I stepped closer, my footsteps muffled by carpet I hadn't noticed before. The chair was empty, had always been empty. The voice, the humming, it was all coming from somewhere else, somewhere inside. The lavender scent was overwhelming now, so strong it made my eyes water. I stumbled backward, reaching for the door, but my hand found only smooth wall. The room had changed shape while I wasn't paying attention, or maybe I had turned around without realizing it. In the corner, a small table held a single object, a bottle, clear glass with a silver cap. Inside, dried purple flowers floated in what looked like oil. The label was handwritten in script I couldn't quite read, but I knew what it said anyway, knew without knowing how I knew. I had seen this bottle before, held it in my hands, used it for something I couldn't remember but wished I could forget. The humming stopped abruptly, leaving behind a silence so complete it felt like pressure against my eardrums. In that silence, I heard my own breathing, ragged and too fast. I heard my heartbeat, irregular and anxious. And underneath it all, so faint I might have imagined it, the sound of footsteps approaching from somewhere I couldn't see. I grabbed the bottle. The glass was warm, as if it had been sitting in sunlight, though the room had no windows. The moment my fingers closed around it, memories began to surface. Fragments, pieces of a puzzle I wasn't sure I wanted to complete. The field again, lavender stretching in every direction under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Someone walking beside me, their hand in mine. We were talking about something important, something that would change everything. But the words were lost now, dissolved by time and willful forgetting. "You have to remember," the voice said, though there was still no one else in the room. "You have to go back." But going back meant facing what I had buried. It meant acknowledging the truth that lived in the spaces between my memories, in the gaps where logic should have been but wasn't. The bottle grew heavier in my hands, or maybe I was growing weaker. The lavender scent was making me dizzy, pulling me down into something that felt like sleep but wasn't quite. I closed my eyes and let it take me. When I opened them again, I was back in the entryway where this all began. The same dust, the same fading wallpaper, the same sense of something being fundamentally wrong. But now I understood why the lavender shouldn't be here, why its presence felt like a violation of the natural order. I had brought it with me, not intentionally, but inevitably. It clung to my clothes, my skin, my hair. It followed me from that sunlit field where everything changed, where someone I loved became someone I lost, where the truth got buried so deep I convinced myself it had never existed at all. The bottle was still in my hand, though I couldn't remember picking it up. The dried flowers inside seemed to move of their own accord, swirling in patterns that reminded me of things I didn't want to remember. A face in the water, hands reaching up toward light they would never touch, the sound of my own voice saying words I wished I could take back. I set the bottle down on the dusty counter and stepped away, but the lavender scent remained. It would always remain now, I realized. A reminder of what I had done, what I had failed to do, what I had chosen to forget. The woman at the counter materialized again, or maybe she had been there all along, waiting for me to see her. She smiled, but it was the kind of smile that held more sorrow than joy. "Did you find what you were looking for?" she asked. I wanted to say no. I wanted to say I had been looking for nothing, that I had stumbled into this place by accident, that the lavender meant nothing and the memories were just tricks my mind was playing. But the bottle sat between us like evidence, like proof of something I couldn't deny anymore. "I think so," I said instead, and the words felt like confession. She nodded as if she had expected this answer, as if she had been part of this story from the beginning, though I couldn't remember how or why. Her fingers resumed their drumming against the wooden counter, keeping time to a rhythm only she could hear. I turned to leave, but the entryway seemed further away than before. Each step took tremendous effort, as if I were walking through water or thick mud. The lavender followed me, wrapping around my ankles like invisible chains. At the threshold, I paused and looked back. The woman was still there, still smiling her sad smile. The bottle still sat on the counter, catching light from a source I couldn't identify, and somewhere, barely audible, the humming had started again. I stepped outside, but the scent came with me. It always would now. Every breath would carry me back to that field, to that moment when everything changed, to the choice I made, and the consequences I buried so deep I almost convinced myself they had never happened. The lavender hit me as soon as I stepped through the entryway, and I knew I would be stepping through it again and again, each time hoping for a different outcome, each time discovering that some truths can't be escaped, only postponed. Story 3. The surveillance footage was reviewed without interruptions. The timestamps matched chronological expectations, maintaining a consistent frame rate. An inventory of objects in the room revealed no discrepancies, each item accounted for and in its expected location. A light layer of dust covered all surfaces, undisturbed. The temperature logs indicated a gradual decline consistent with evening conditions. No personal belongings were retrieved, nor were any present initially. The curtains remained drawn throughout, despite the absence of any windows. The screen. I've watched this footage 17 times now, each viewing revealing something I missed before. The monitor flickers occasionally, just a brief interruption in the steady stream of grainy images. That flicker bothers me more than it should. Technical glitches happen, but this one seems deliberate, as if the camera blinked at precisely the moments I needed to see most clearly. The screen reflects my face when the image goes dark during those micro-interruptions, and I look older than I remember being when I started this investigation. The chair asterisk. The wooden chair in the center of the room sits at an angle that defies logic. Every time I measure it against the grid lines on the floor, it appears to be facing a different direction. In the early frames, it seemed positioned toward what should have been a door. By the final timestamp, it had somehow rotated 15 degrees clockwise. No one entered the room during the recording period. No vibrations registered on the building's seismic monitors. Yet the chair moved incrementally, frame by frame, like the minute hand of a clock. The dust. That undisturbed layer tells a story I'm not sure I want to understand. Dust settles in patterns, following air currents and gravitational pull. But the patterns here form shapes that seem almost intentional. Near the chair's legs, the dust has arranged itself in perfect circles, as if someone had been walking around it repeatedly. The circles are too precise to be accidental, too subtle to be fabricated. When I enhance the image quality, the dust particles appear to shimmer with an internal light that shouldn't exist. The curtains asterisk. Heavy velvet drapes hang along the eastern wall, their burgundy fabric faded to the color of dried blood. They move throughout the recording, swaying gently as if stirred by a breeze that couldn't possibly exist in a sealed room. The movement follows a rhythm I recognize but can't place. 3 short sways, 2 long ones, a pause, then repetition. It reminds me of something from childhood, a pattern tapped on my bedroom wall during thunderstorms. The person who used to tap that pattern has been dead for 7 years. The temperature gauge. The digital readout in the corner of the frame drops steadily from 72 degrees to 58 over the course of 6 hours. Climate control systems don't fail that gradually, that consistently. Cold spots indicate presence according to the literature I've been reading lately, but this isn't a cold spot. It's a cold room growing colder with each passing hour, as if something were drawing heat from the air itself. My breath fogs when I think about it too long, even though my office is perfectly warm. The inventory sheet. One desk, mahogany finish, 3 drawers, one chair, oak construction, ladderback design, one lamp, brass base, white shade, one rug, Persian pattern, burgundy and gold. The list continues for 2 pages, each item cataloged with obsessive precision. But I've counted the objects in the room myself, frame by frame, and I keep finding discrepancies. Sometimes there are 2 lamps. Sometimes the rug appears to extend beyond the camera's field of view. Sometimes the chair casts 2 shadows, though only one light source is visible. The silence asterisk. Audio analysis reveals no sound above ambient levels throughout the recording period. No footsteps, no voices, no mechanical noise. The silence is so complete it feels manufactured. Real silence doesn't exist in occupied buildings. There should be electrical hums, settling sounds, distant traffic. Instead, there's nothing but a baseline frequency that matches the resonance of an empty tomb. When I play the audio through headphones, I hear my own heartbeat echoing back at me, though that's technically impossible. The reflection. In the brass base of the lamp, distorted but unmistakable, a figure appears intermittently throughout the recording. The figure seems to be observing, standing just outside the camera's range. Enhancement software can't clarify the image, but the posture is familiar. The way the shoulders slope, the angle of the head, the positioning of what might be hands. I've seen that silhouette before, in family photographs I thought I'd destroyed years ago. The shadow. Light enters the room from sources that don't appear on camera. The shadows cast by furniture shift direction every few minutes, suggesting multiple light sources moving in patterns around the room's perimeter. But the lamp remains stationary, its bulb providing the only visible illumination. The shadows grow longer as the temperature drops, stretching across the floor like fingers reaching toward the chair. By the final frames, the shadows have merged into a single dark mass that seems to pulse with its own rhythm. The timeline asterisk. 6 hours and 14 minutes of continuous footage, according to the metadata. But when I time the recording with a stopwatch, it runs for 6 hours and 37 minutes. The discrepancy isn't consistent. Some segments play faster than they should, others slower. During the periods of acceleration, the chair's rotation becomes visible to the naked eye. During the slowdowns, the curtain's movement takes on an almost hypnotic quality that makes my eyes water if I watch too long. The building plan. The architectural drawings show no room matching the dimensions captured on camera. The space appears to be rectangular, approximately 12 by 15 feet, with a standard 8-foot ceiling. But according to the blueprints, that section of the building houses a mechanical room with exposed pipes and electrical conduits. The elegant hardwood floors and decorative molding visible in the footage shouldn't exist. The building has been renovated 3 times in the past decade, and no record exists of the room I'm watching. The key asterisk. A small brass key appears on the desk's surface during the 4th hour of recording. It wasn't there in previous frames, and no one entered the room to place it. The key is ornate, with a decorative head featuring a pattern I recognize from antique jewelry boxes. My grandmother owned a similar key, used to lock away items she deemed too precious or too dangerous for everyday handling. That key disappeared when her house was cleared after the funeral, along with the box it opened. The mirror. Though no mirror is visible in the room, reflective surfaces throughout the space show images that don't match the camera's perspective. The lamp's base reflects a doorway that should be behind the camera's position. The polished surface of the desk shows a ceiling fixture that doesn't appear in the overhead view. Most disturbing is the reflection in what appears to be a picture frame on the far wall. The glass surface shows my face, watching, even though the recording was made weeks before I first viewed it. The papers. Scattered documents become visible on the desk's surface as the recording progresses, though they weren't there initially and no one placed them. The papers appear to be handwritten, covered in text too small to read even with digital enhancement. The handwriting style looks familiar, resembling the careful cursive I practiced in elementary school. One document appears to be a list with items checked off methodically. Another looks like a letter with what might be a signature at the bottom. The breathing. Audio enhancement reveals a rhythmic pattern beneath the baseline frequency. It sounds like breathing, slow and measured, as if someone were sleeping peacefully just outside the microphone's range. The pattern matches human respiratory rates during deep sleep, approximately 12 breaths per minute, but the pattern is too regular, too consistent to be natural. Real breathing varies with dreams, with position changes, with the natural fluctuations of sleep cycles. This breathing never changes, never falters, never stops. The light switch. A standard toggle switch is visible on the wall beside where a door should be. Throughout the recording, the switch moves between positions without any apparent cause. Up, down, up again, following no discernible pattern. The room's illumination doesn't change when the switch moves, suggesting it controls something outside the camera's view, or perhaps something that can't be seen by electronic sensors. Each time the switch flips, the temperature drops by exactly 2 degrees. The footprint. Though the dust remains undisturbed across most surfaces, a careful examination reveals impressions in the carpet near the chair. The impressions are subtle, visible only when the light hits the fabric at specific angles. They form a circular pattern around the chair, consistent with someone walking in slow, measured circles. The stride length suggests someone of average height, wearing soft-soled shoes or walking barefoot. The impressions grow deeper as the recording progresses, as if the walker were becoming heavier with each circuit. The clock. No timepiece is visible in the room, yet the sound of ticking becomes audible during the final hour of recording. The rhythm is irregular, sometimes fast, sometimes slow, occasionally stopping entirely before resuming at a different pace. The ticking doesn't correspond to the timestamps on the footage, which continue their steady progression regardless of the audio anomalies. When I synchronize the ticking with my own heartbeat, the patterns begin to match, as if the invisible clock were keeping time with my pulse. The recognition. Something about this room pulls at memories I thought I'd buried successfully. The arrangement of furniture, the quality of light, the particular shade of the curtains. It resembles a room from my childhood, a place I was forbidden to enter without permission. The room where important conversations happened behind closed doors, where adults spoke in whispers about things children shouldn't understand. That room was dismantled years ago, its contents distributed or discarded. Yet here it stands, preserved in digital amber, waiting for me to remember what I've spent so long trying to forget. The final frame. The recording ends abruptly mid-motion, as if the camera simply stopped functioning. In that final frozen image, everything appears exactly as it did in the opening frame, except for one detail that makes my hands shake as I type this report. The chair, which had been slowly rotating throughout the 6-hour recording, now faces directly toward the camera. And in its seat, barely visible in the shadows but unmistakably present, is the outline of someone sitting perfectly still, waiting patiently for me to understand what I'm really looking at. Story 4. It smelled like fresh soil after rain, though I was nowhere near a garden. The aroma lingered in the hallway, earthy and damp, clinging to the air with a misplaced familiarity. As I stepped cautiously around, a vague sensation curled around my spine, coaxing a feeling too familiar to ignore. My gaze drifted to the floor, to dusty wooden planks that should have been clean, undisturbed. The scent deepened, intensifying, as though I had breathed it in a lifetime ago, beneath a different sky. I tried to pinpoint its source, but the walls seemed to exhale it softly, persistently. It shouldn't have belonged there, but somehow I knew it did. The last time I remembered this scent, something irreversible had happened. I shouldn't be recalling this, but I was. The hallway stretched longer than it should have. I counted my steps, then lost track. The floorboards creaked in a rhythm I recognized but couldn't place. Someone had walked this path before me. Someone had paused at the same spots where I now hesitated. There was a door at the end. Had it always been there? I remember hands, not my hands, larger hands with dirt beneath the fingernails. They were holding something small, something that caught the light. A key, maybe, or a coin. The image flickers and fades before I can focus on it properly. The smell grows stronger near the door. I press my palm against the wood and feel the grain beneath my skin. Rough, unfinished. This isn't right. The door was painted blue before. Or was it green? The color shifts in my memory like water. You're not supposed to be here, a voice says, but when I turn around, the hallway is empty. The voice could have been mine, could have been someone else's. Could have been an echo from another time entirely. I try to remember how I got here. There was a car ride, or maybe I walked. The transition feels lost, like trying to recall the moment between waking and sleeping. 1 second I was somewhere else, and then I was here, breathing in earth and rain that shouldn't exist inside these walls. The key turns easily in my hand. When did I pick up a key? I don't remember finding it, but it's there, warm against my palm as if it's been waiting for me. The metal is old, tarnished. There are scratches along its surface that might be letters or might just be wear. Inside the room, everything is exactly as I left it, except I've never been in this room before. The contradiction sits heavy in my chest. Dust motes dance in the light from a window I didn't notice opening. The air tastes stale and sweet, like flowers left too long in water. There's a chair in the center of the room, just one chair facing away from me. I walk around it slowly, expecting to find someone sitting there, but it's empty. The seat is worn smooth, as if someone spent considerable time in it, waiting maybe, or watching. I told you not to come back, the voice says again, and this time I'm certain it's not mine. But when I look around, I'm still alone. The voice seems to come from the walls themselves, absorbed into the wood and plaster over time. I remember a conversation, fragments of it anyway. Someone was upset. There was talk of leaving, of never coming back. Promises were made, promises were broken. The details slip away even as I try to hold on to them. The window overlooks a yard I don't recognize. There's a patch of disturbed earth near the back fence, darker than the surrounding grass, fresh soil. The scent makes sense now, but the understanding brings no comfort. I turn away from the window and notice something else. There are marks on the floor, scuff marks in the dust. They form a pattern like someone had been pacing. Back and forth, wearing a path between the chair and the door. How long would it take to make marks like that? How many trips back and forth? The smell is strongest near the floorboards by the far wall. I kneel down and press my nose close to the wood. Earth and rain and something else, something organic and patient. My hands shake as I run them along the planks, feeling for loose boards, for spaces that shouldn't be there. One board gives slightly under pressure, just a little, just enough. I remember a shovel, the weight of it in my hands heavier than I expected, the resistance of the earth as the blade bit into it. But that was outside, wasn't it? That was in the yard. The memory doesn't fit with where I am now, but it feels connected somehow. You said you'd forget, the voice whispers, closer now. You promised you'd let it go. Did I promise that? The words feel familiar in my mouth, like something I might have said. But to whom and why? There's a photograph on the windowsill, face down. I hadn't noticed it before, but now it seems to pulse with importance. I reach for it, then stop. Some things once seen can't be unseen. Some doors once opened can't be closed again. The light in the room is changing, growing dimmer, though I can't tell if it's getting late or if clouds are moving across the sun. The shadows shift and dance, making the empty chair seem occupied one moment and abandoned the next. I think about the person who sat in that chair. I think about what they might have been watching through that window. The patch of dark earth draws my attention again, and I understand that it's newer than the rest of the yard, much newer. The floorboard moves more easily now, as if it's been disturbed recently. As if someone else has been here, doing exactly what I'm doing now. The thought should frighten me, but instead it feels inevitable. Of course someone else would come looking. Of course they would find this room, smell that scent, feel drawn to the same loose board. Underneath there's a space, not large but deep enough, dark enough. I can't see what's inside, but I can smell it. Earth and rain and time and secrets. My hands move without my conscious direction, reaching into the space. My fingers find fabric first, then something harder. Something that doesn't belong buried under floorboards in an empty room. Something that explains the chair, the pacing, the promises, the fear in that disembodied voice. "I'm sorry," I whisper, though I'm not sure who I'm apologizing to. The person who sat in the chair, the voice that warned me not to come back, myself. The photograph on the windowsill catches my eye again. This time I pick it up, turn it over. The face looking back at me is familiar and strange at once. I know this person. I've seen them before, maybe in this very room. Maybe sitting in that chair, staring out at the yard where the earth is dark and fresh. The memory comes back in pieces. A conversation, an argument, someone leaving, saying they wouldn't be back, but they did come back, didn't they? They came back and sat in that chair and waited. Waited for what? For whom? For me. The scent of fresh soil fills my nostrils again, stronger now, as if the earth itself is trying to tell me something. I look down at what I've found beneath the floorboard, and the pieces start to fit together in ways I don't want them to. There was a reason I forgot. There was a reason I stayed away. There was a reason that voice warned me not to come back. But I did come back. I always come back. The room feels smaller now, the walls pressing closer. The chair seems to be waiting for me to sit down, to take my turn watching the window, watching the yard, watching the dark patch of earth that holds so many secrets. I replace the floorboard carefully, making sure it sits flush with the others. The evidence disappears, but the knowledge remains. Some things can be buried, but they don't stay buried forever. Some scents linger in hallways where they don't belong, drawing people back to places they swore they'd never visit again. The key is still in my hand when I leave the room. I lock the door behind me, but I know it doesn't matter. Locks can't keep out memories. They can't keep out guilt. They can't keep out the truth. The hallway stretches before me, longer than it was when I arrived. My footsteps echo differently now, heavier somehow. The walls still exhale that earthy scent, but now I understand why. Now I know what's buried beneath this place, what's been waiting patiently for someone to remember. As I reach the end of the hallway, I catch that smell again. Fresh soil after rain, though I'm nowhere near a garden. The aroma clings to me now, follows me as I leave. It will always follow me, I realize. It will draw me back here again and again, to this room, to that chair, to the dark earth that holds its secrets just beneath the surface. I try to forget as I walk away, but forgetting is harder now. The scent has awakened something that was sleeping, something that was buried as carefully as everything else in this place. The memories will come back stronger next time, clearer. The voice will be louder. The truth will be harder to ignore. Behind me, the building settles with a sound like a sigh, or like someone sitting down in an empty chair, preparing to wait. The earth remembers what we try to forget. The walls hold onto our secrets long after we've convinced ourselves they're gone. And somewhere in a room I've locked but can never truly leave behind, that scent lingers still. Story 5. My eyes were fixed on the picture frame, its corner tilted downward at an impossible angle. The room was still, yet charged like the air before a storm. Shadows from the afternoon light stretched awkwardly across the floor, distorting familiar shapes. The walls seemed closer, pressing in with a silence that felt thick, almost tangible. A draft I couldn't locate whispered softly, unsettling the dust. But the frame, a detail so trivial not once had I seen it slant before, and it was this discord that rooted me in place. I told myself I would get up when the shadows moved. Then, an edge of the frame gleamed a speck of glass, a fracture that wasn't there before. The photograph inside shows two figures standing beside a lake, their faces blurred by what I once believed was camera shake. Now I study their postures more carefully. The taller figure's hand rests on the shorter one's shoulder, but the grip appears tense, fingers pressed too deeply into fabric. The shorter figure leans away, almost imperceptibly, as if pulled by an invisible current. I remember taking this picture, remember the weight of the camera in my hands, remember calling out for them to smile. But the more I examine their expressions, the more I question whether they were truly happy that day, or whether I simply wanted to believe they were. The coffee table bears rings from countless mugs, overlapping circles that form an abstract pattern across its wooden surface. Each mark tells a story of mornings spent in comfortable routine, of conversations that flowed as easily as the steam rising from our cups. But there's one ring that stands apart from the others, darker and whiter, as if something heavier had been placed there. I trace its circumference with my finger, trying to recall what could have left such a mark. The wood feels rough beneath my touch, scarred in a way that suggests not just moisture but heat, as if something had been pressed there with force. The bookshelf against the far wall holds volumes arranged with meticulous care, spines aligned perfectly except for one. A slim journal protrudes slightly from the row, its leather cover worn smooth by handling. I know this journal intimately, have filled its pages with thoughts and observations over many months, yet something about its placement disturbs me now. I always returned it to its proper position, flush with the other books. Someone else has been reading it, has pulled it from its place, and failed to restore the order I maintained so carefully. The scent of lavender still clings to the curtains, a fragrance I associated with peace and comfort. But underneath that familiar sweetness lurks something else, something medicinal and sharp. I breathe deeper, trying to identify the underlying odor. It reminds me of the antiseptic smell that follows cleaning, the kind of thorough scrubbing that aims to eliminate rather than simply refresh. The curtains hang differently too, as if they've been removed and rehung, their folds not quite matching the patterns of light and shadow I remember. The floorboards creak in a specific sequence when walked upon, a rhythm I learned to navigate in darkness. 3 steps from the doorway, then a longer stride to avoid the particularly vocal plank near the center of the room. But now I notice scratches in the wood that weren't there before, thin lines that suggest furniture has been moved and replaced. The scratches don't align with the current positions of the chairs and table, implying a different arrangement existed at some point, one I don't remember authorizing or witnessing. The telephone sits silent on its small table, its black surface reflecting the window's light. I remember conversations conducted in whispers, urgent exchanges that ended abruptly when footsteps approached. The receiver still bears the slight depression where fingers gripped it too tightly, where anxiety manifested in physical pressure. But there's something else about the phone that troubles me now, something about the way its cord has been coiled. I always left it loose, careless in my haste to end those difficult calls. Someone with different habits has used this phone, someone who takes care to organize even the smallest details. The mirror above the mantelpiece reflects the room back at me, but the image seems subtly wrong, as if the glass has developed a flaw that distorts perception. My reflection appears thinner, more angular than I expect, my features sharpened by shadows that don't match the room's lighting. But it's not my appearance that unsettles me most, it's what I can see behind me in the reflection, objects that seem positioned differently than when I look at them directly. The mirror shows a version of the room that doesn't quite align with reality, or perhaps reality has shifted while I wasn't paying attention. The heating vent in the corner releases air with a mechanical sigh, but the sound carries undertones I don't recognize. Sometimes I hear what might be voices, distant conversations filtering through the ductwork from other parts of the building. The words remain indistinct, but the tone suggests urgency, perhaps concern. I press my ear closer to the vent, trying to decipher the meaning, but the sounds fade whenever I focus too intently, as if they exist only at the edge of perception. The doorknob shows signs of frequent polishing, its brass surface gleaming more brightly than I remember. Someone has been very careful to eliminate fingerprints, to maintain a surface so clean it reflects light like a mirror. I don't recall being so meticulous about such details, yet the evidence suggests otherwise. When I touch the knob, it feels cold despite the room's warmth, as if it hasn't been used recently, as if the door has remained closed for longer than I believed. The calendar on the wall displays a month I recognize, but several dates have been marked with symbols I don't remember making. Small X's and circles dot certain days, creating a pattern that might be meaningful if I could decode it. The markings are made in pencil, light enough that they might be missed by casual observation, but deliberate enough to suggest purpose. I study my own handwriting in other notes, comparing the pressure and angle of the marks, but I cannot determine with certainty whether these symbols came from my hand. The window glass bears the ghostly imprint of a palm, barely visible except when the light hits at precisely the right angle. The print is smaller than my own hand, the fingers more delicate, suggesting someone else stood at this window, perhaps looking out at the same view that now holds my attention. I try to imagine what they might have seen, whether they observed something that escaped my notice. The glass is cold against my forehead as I peer through it, searching for clues in the landscape beyond. The carpet beneath my feet shows where patterns that don't match my usual movements through the room. A path has been worn between the window and the telephone, suggesting regular trips I don't remember making. The fabric is compressed in spots where someone might have knelt or crouched, positions I can't associate with any activities I recall performing. The carpet holds secrets in its fibers, evidence of behaviors that exist outside my conscious memory. The light switch by the door has been adjusted recently, its screws tightened and its plate straightened. I remember it hanging slightly askew, a minor imperfection I had grown accustomed to ignoring. Someone with different standards has corrected this flaw, has taken the time to make repairs I never prioritized. The switch operates smoothly now, without the slight resistance that once required extra pressure to engage. The air in the room carries a staleness that suggests poor ventilation, but underneath that stuffiness lies something else, something that reminds me of anxiety and fear. It's the scent of perspiration mixed with the metallic tang of adrenaline, as if someone spent considerable time here in a state of distress. I breathe through my mouth, trying to avoid the smell, but it seems to coat my throat, lingering despite my attempts to escape it. The picture frame draws my attention again, its tilted angle now seeming less accidental and more deliberate. The crack in the glass has spread slightly, creating a web of fractures that distort the photograph behind it. The two figures by the lake appear even more disconnected now, separated by lines of broken glass that slice through their images. I reach toward the frame, intending to straighten it, but my hand stops short. Something about touching it feels dangerous, as if the simple act of adjustment might shatter whatever fragile truth the room still contains. The shadows have moved as I promised myself they would, but instead of leaving, I find myself more deeply rooted in place. The room holds me with its contradictions, its evidence of presence and absence intertwined. Each detail speaks to a reality I thought I understood, but their collective voice tells a different story, one where my certainty dissolves into questions I'm not sure I want answered. The frame continues to gleam in the shifting light, its broken surface reflecting fragments of truth that refuse to form a complete picture. Story 6. I used to hear the footsteps every evening, a comforting routine that marked the end of the day. They would start down the hallway at exactly the same pace, a reliable sound that meant everything outside was steady and unchanged. But last Tuesday, the footsteps paused for just a moment, as if reconsidering their path. By Thursday, the pause grew into a hesitation, a shuffle that seemed to linger a fraction too long. Tonight, though, the steps didn't come at all, and the doorframe creaked in their absence. I can't help but feel as though someone is waiting on the other side, deciding whether to continue. The nausea starts in my stomach like a cold marble rolling around, gathering weight. I've been carrying this feeling for weeks now, maybe longer. Time feels elastic these days, stretching and contracting without warning. The absence of those footsteps tonight has awakened something I thought I'd buried beneath layers of routine and careful forgetting. My hands are shaking as I write this, not from fear exactly, but from a recognition that's been clawing its way to the surface. The footsteps belong to someone, obviously, someone who lived here before the silence took over, someone whose presence I've been avoiding acknowledging, even to myself. I remember the smell first. It always comes back to the smell, sweet and cloying like flowers left too long in water. It was strongest near the bedroom door, the one that stays closed now. I told myself it was just old carpet, maybe a leak somewhere in the walls. Houses develop their own scents over time, don't they? But this smell had personality and tension. It seemed to follow me from room to room, settling into my clothes, my hair, the spaces between my fingers. The mirror in the hallway reflects nothing unusual, just my face, pale and drawn, eyes that look like they haven't slept properly in months. But sometimes in my peripheral vision, I catch movement that shouldn't be there. A shadow that doesn't match my gestures. A shape that seems to pause when I pause, breathe when I breathe, but always a fraction of a second off, like an echo made visible. I found the photographs last week, or maybe it was last month. They were tucked behind the loose baseboard in the kitchen, wrapped in a plastic bag that crackled when I touched it. The faces in the pictures were familiar in a way that made my chest tight. Not familiar like old friends, but familiar like something you've tried very hard to forget. The eyes in those photographs seemed to track my movement across the room. When I put them back, my hands left damp prints on the plastic. The footsteps, when they were still coming, had a particular rhythm. Step, step, pause, like someone carrying something heavy, redistributing weight with each movement. I counted them sometimes, lying in bed with my eyes closed, pretending to be asleep. 37 steps from the front door to the bedroom, always 37, until the pauses started getting longer. My therapist says trauma manifests in unexpected ways. She uses words like displacement and projection, speaking in that careful tone reserved for patients who might be more fragile than they appear. But she doesn't live here. She doesn't feel the temperature drop in certain corners of the house, doesn't notice how the floorboards seem to remember the weight of someone who isn't there anymore. I've been avoiding the basement. There's no reason to go down there anyway. Just storage boxes and old furniture covered in sheets that look like sleeping ghosts. But the basement door has started opening on its own. Just a crack, never wide enough to see inside, but enough to let that sweet, rotting smell drift upstairs. I keep closing it, turning the handle firmly, checking the latch. By morning, it's open again. The dreams are getting more vivid. In them, I'm always cleaning something, scrubbing at stains that won't come out, washing my hands until they're raw, changing sheets that look clean but feel contaminated. I wake up with my fingernails full of dirt, though I haven't been gardening, haven't been outside much at all, actually. The world beyond these walls feels too bright, too loud, too full of people who might ask questions I can't answer. Sometimes I catch myself having conversations with someone who isn't there. Not out loud, but in my head, responding to comments I didn't hear, defending actions I can't remember taking. The other voice is patient, persistent. It asks why I moved the rug in the living room, why I bought so much bleach, why I've been paying the utility bills for 2 people when only 1 person lives here now. The neighbors have stopped waving. They used to smile when they saw me checking the mail, offer small talk about the weather or the condition of the street. Now they look away quickly, hurry their children inside when I appear on the porch. I wonder what they've noticed that I haven't, or what they've noticed that I've been trying not to notice myself. I found hair in the shower drain that wasn't mine. Longer, darker, tangled with something that might have been thread or might have been something else entirely. I pulled it out with tweezers, holding my breath, trying not to think about how it got there. The drain gurgled when I was finished, a sound like someone trying to speak underwater. The footsteps used to comfort me because they meant I wasn't alone. Now their absence terrifies me for the same reason. Being alone means being responsible for everything that happens in this house. Every sound, every smell, every shadow that moves independently of light sources. If I'm alone, then all of this is coming from inside me, and that possibility feels more frightening than any external explanation. I've been checking the locks obsessively. Front door, back door, windows, the basement door that won't stay closed. The mechanisms feel loose under my fingers, unreliable. But what am I trying to keep out, or what am I trying to keep in? The photographs keep moving. I put them back behind the baseboard, but they migrate. I find them under my pillow, tucked between pages of books I haven't opened, taped to the inside of the medicine cabinet. In each new location, they seem more insistent, more accusatory. The faces in the pictures have expressions I don't remember seeing before. Disappointment, maybe, or betrayal. My memory has holes in it. Big ones like someone took scissors to a film strip and cut out all the important scenes. I remember being happy here once. I remember laughter echoing through these rooms, music playing, the smell of cooking food instead of dying flowers. But those memories feel borrowed, like scenes from someone else's life that I've convinced myself I lived. The silence where the footsteps used to be is getting louder. It is weight, presence, intention. It presses against my eardrums and makes my teeth ache. I've started playing music to fill the space, but the silence seeps through anyway, muffling the notes, distorting the rhythm until even familiar songs sound wrong. I cleaned out the bedroom closet yesterday, or thought I did, but when I went back this morning, everything was exactly as I'd found it. Clothes hanging in arrangements I don't remember making, shoes positioned like someone just stepped out of them, jewelry scattered on the small table like it was being sorted for a special occasion that never came. The cold marble in my stomach is getting heavier. It rolls from side to side when I move, a constant reminder of something I can't quite grasp. Sometimes I press my hands against my abdomen, trying to stop its movement, but it just shifts to a different position, settles into a new corner of my body to make itself at home. I've been seeing things in my peripheral vision that disappear when I turn my head. Movement that's too purposeful to be shadows, too familiar to be imagination. A figure that seems to be watching me from doorways, following me from room to room with the patience of someone who has all the time in the world to wait for me to remember something important. The house feels smaller than it used to. Rooms that once seemed spacious now press close around me. Walls that once felt protective now seem confining. I measure distances with my steps, count the paces from bed to bathroom, kitchen to living room, but the numbers keep changing. 37 steps from front door to bedroom, now 35, now 40. The house is rearranging itself around me, or my perception is coming loose from reality. I keep finding things I don't remember buying. Cleaning supplies under the kitchen sink, gardening tools in the garage, a shovel with dirt still clinging to the blade. When I try to remember purchasing these items, my mind slides away from the memory like water off glass. There's a receipt in my wallet for a hardware store, but the date is smudged and the items are listed in code numbers that mean nothing to me. The sweet smell is getting stronger. It's not just near the bedroom door anymore. It's everywhere, soaked into the walls, the furniture, my clothes, my skin. I've tried opening windows, running fans, burning candles, but nothing helps. The smell has become part of the house's atmosphere, as integral as the paint on the walls or the nails holding the floorboards down. Sometimes I catch myself standing in front of the closed bedroom door with my hand on the knob, not remembering how I got there or what I intended to do. The door feels warm under my palm, like something alive is breathing on the other side. I never turn the handle. I don't think I want to see what's in there, but part of me knows I already have. The footsteps have stopped, but I can still feel their echo in the floorboards. The house remembers the rhythm even if the walker is gone. Step, step, pause, step, step, pause. The pattern is embedded in the wood grain, worn into the carpet fibers, imprinted on the air itself. Even in silence, the house continues to count those 37 steps over and over like a heartbeat that refuses to stop. Tonight, sitting in the living room with all the lights on, I finally understand why the neighbors look away, why the basement door won't stay closed, why I keep finding things I don't remember losing and losing things I don't remember finding. The cold marble in my stomach isn't nausea at all. It's recognition, finally surfacing after being held underwater for so long. The footsteps belong to someone who lived here, someone whose photographs keep appearing in places I try to forget, someone whose absence is so profound it has its own presence, its own weight, its own insistent rhythm that echoes through empty hallways and closed doors and the spaces between my thoughts where memory should be but isn't. I'm still sitting here waiting for the footsteps to resume, waiting for that familiar rhythm to return and restore the illusion that everything is normal, that the house contains only one person, that the shadows move in predictable patterns and the smells have innocent explanations. But deep down in the place where the cold marble has finally settled, I know the footsteps aren't coming back. Because whoever made them isn't walking anymore. And I'm the only one left who remembers why. Story 7. The weight of silence. The ceiling fan spun lazily, casting elongated shadows across the dimly lit room. A distant hum of city life seeped through the cracked window, but inside the air carried the sharp scent of citrus polish clinging to the wooden floor. What caught my eye, though, was the dusty armchair facing the wall, as though it had been hastily turned away from the rest. Its seat bore the faint imprint of someone recently departed, leaving behind an unsettling silence. It was as if the room itself was holding its breath, waiting for something or someone to return. I had been working as a private investigator for over a decade, but this case felt different from the moment I stepped through that front door. The woman who hired me had spoken in whispers over the phone, her voice trembling as she described her missing sister. She couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible had happened, something the police weren't taking seriously enough. The missing woman's apartment told a story I couldn't quite decipher yet. Everything appeared normal at first glance: dishes neatly stacked in the sink, bed made with military precision, mail sorted into careful piles on the kitchen counter. But there were subtle wrongnesses that made my skin crawl. A coffee mug sat on the table with a perfect ring of dried liquid at the bottom, as if someone had taken exactly 3 sips and then simply vanished mid-morning routine. I ran my fingers along the windowsill, feeling the grit of accumulated dust, and noticed something peculiar. The plants on the ledge were dying, their leaves brown and brittle, except for one small succulent that looked recently watered. Someone had been here since she disappeared, caring for just that one plant while letting the others wither. The sister had given me a key and permission to search. Desperate for answers, the authorities seemed reluctant to pursue. According to the police report I'd managed to review, there were no signs of struggle, no evidence of foul play. Just a woman who apparently decided to leave her life behind without warning. But sisters know things others don't, and this one insisted her sibling would never abandon her responsibilities, her cat, her carefully cultivated routine. I opened the refrigerator and immediately recoiled from the sour smell of spoiled milk and rotting vegetables. Yet tucked behind the decay was a fresh carton of orange juice, its expiration date still weeks away. My pulse quickened as I examined the receipt stuck to its side, purchased just 3 days ago, long after she was reported missing. The bedroom revealed more inconsistencies. Her clothes hung in a closet with obsessive organization, color coordinated and facing the same direction. But the hamper contained only men's clothing: a wrinkled shirt that smelled of unfamiliar cologne, boxer shorts that were clearly too large for a woman of her size. When I mentioned this to the sister later, she claimed her sibling had been single for months. That evening I sat in my own apartment reviewing the photographs I'd taken, spreading them across my kitchen table like pieces of a puzzle that refused to form a complete picture. The image of that turned armchair haunted me. Who sits facing a blank wall, and why did the cushion still hold the impression of someone's weight? I decided to visit the neighbors, starting with the elderly man who lived directly across the hall. He answered his door wearing a bathrobe despite the afternoon hour, his eyes darting nervously as I introduced myself. He claimed he hadn't seen or heard anything unusual, but his hands shook as he spoke, and he kept glancing toward the missing woman's door. When I asked about visitors, his demeanor changed entirely. He became very still, very quiet, before insisting he minded his own business and suggesting I do the same. But as I walked away, I heard his chain lock slide into place with unusual urgency. The woman downstairs proved more talkative, though her information was equally unsettling. She described hearing footsteps at odd hours, not the familiar pattern of the missing woman's heels, but heavy boots that paced back and forth across the floor above. These sounds had continued even after the disappearance was reported. More disturbing were the phone calls. The downstairs neighbor complained about a phone ringing at all hours in the empty apartment above, sometimes for minutes at a time before falling silent. When I asked if she'd reported this to the police, she shrugged and said they'd told her it was probably telemarketers calling an abandoned line. I returned to the apartment that night, using the key the sister had provided. The darkness felt different now, heavier somehow. I made my way to the phone and checked the answering machine, an old model with a digital display showing 17 new messages. My finger trembled slightly as I pressed play. The first few messages were routine appointment reminders, a friend asking about lunch plans, but as I listened, the calls became stranger. Long stretches of silence punctuated by the sound of someone breathing, then whispered words I couldn't quite make out, as if the caller was trying to communicate something they couldn't say aloud. The final message made my blood run cold. It was her voice, unmistakably, speaking in a flat monotone that sounded nothing like the warm, animated woman her sister had described. She simply said, "I'm sorry for everything, don't look for me. I'm somewhere safe now." But in the background, I could hear something that didn't belong, the faint sound of that ceiling fan, the same one spinning above me now. I played the message again, focusing on every detail. The timestamp showed it was left 2 days after she was reported missing, but something about the audio quality seemed wrong. It had the hollow, compressed sound of a recording played through a speaker rather than someone speaking directly into the phone. My investigation led me to her workplace, a small accounting firm where she'd been employed for nearly 5 years. Her colleagues described her as reliable and punctual, someone who never missed a day without calling ahead. Her desk remained exactly as she'd left it, with a half-finished report still glowing on her computer screen. The office manager, a thin man with nervous energy, seemed eager to help but kept contradicting himself. First he said she'd been acting normally in the days before her disappearance, then mentioned she'd seemed distracted and jumpy. When I pressed for details, he became vague and suggested I speak with her direct supervisor instead. The supervisor was a woman with calculating eyes who chose her words carefully. She confirmed that the missing woman had been working on a sensitive audit, reviewing discrepancies in several client accounts. When I asked to see the files, she claimed they'd been reassigned and were no longer available. Her smile never reached her eyes as she assured me there was nothing unusual about the case. But the security guard, an older man who worked the night shift, told a different story when I caught him during his smoke break. He'd noticed the missing woman staying late more frequently in the weeks before she vanished, often appearing agitated as she left the building. More importantly, he'd seen her talking to someone in the parking lot on her last day, a conversation that looked heated from his vantage point. The man she'd been arguing with was tall and wore an expensive suit, but the guard couldn't make out his features in the dim lighting. What he remembered clearly was how the woman had backed away from this stranger, her body language suggesting fear rather than familiarity. I spent the following days trying to piece together her final weeks, but every lead seemed to dissolve upon closer examination. Friends described subtle changes in her behavior, canceled plans, evasive answers about her personal life, a new reluctance to discuss work, yet none of them had felt alarmed enough to intervene. Her sister provided more insight during our second meeting, held in a coffee shop that felt too bright and cheerful for our dark conversation. She revealed that her sibling had called her just once in the month before disappearing, sounding strained and distracted. When pressed about what was troubling her, the missing woman had only said she'd discovered something at work that made her question everything she thought she knew about her life. The sister also mentioned finding strange charges on their shared family credit card payments to a private mailbox service and a storage facility across town. We drove there together, but the storage unit was empty except for a single cardboard box containing old tax documents and a few personal photographs. Among those photographs was one that stopped me cold. It showed the missing woman at what appeared to be a company party, smiling alongside colleagues I recognized from my visit to her office. But in the background, barely visible, stood the same tall man the security guard had described, the one she'd been arguing with in the parking lot. When I showed the photograph to the office manager, his reaction was immediate and telling. His face went pale, and he claimed he'd never seen the man before, despite the fact that the photo was clearly taken at a company event. His hands shook as he handed the picture back to me, and he suddenly remembered an urgent appointment that required my immediate departure. That night I returned to the apartment one final time, hoping the familiar space might reveal secrets I'd missed. The citrus scent of floor polish had faded, replaced by something mustier and more unsettling. I sat in that strange armchair, turning it to face the room as it should have been, and tried to understand why someone had positioned it toward the wall. From this new angle, I could see everything: the front door, the kitchen, the hallway leading to the bedroom. It was the perfect vantage point for someone who wanted to monitor the entire living space. But why face it away? What had the occupant been trying not to see? As I sat there in the growing darkness, I became aware of sounds I'd missed during my previous visits. The building settled around me with creaks and sighs, but underneath those normal noises was something else, a rhythmic tapping that seemed to come from within the walls themselves. I followed the sound to the bedroom, where it was strongest near the closet. The tapping wasn't random. It had a pattern, like someone trying to communicate in code. My rational mind insisted it was just old pipes or settling wood, but something deeper made me press my ear against the wall and listen more carefully. The pattern repeated every few minutes: 3 short taps, followed by 2 longer ones, then silence. It reminded me of something, though I couldn't place what. I found myself tapping back, matching the rhythm, and for a moment the sounds from within the wall seemed to respond. I spent the rest of that night researching the building's history, searching for any information that might explain what I was experiencing. The structure was older than I'd initially thought, built in an era when construction standards were different. There were spaces between walls, gaps that could conceivably hide someone or something. But it was the building's ownership records that provided the most disturbing revelation. The property was managed by a company that shared an address with one of the accounting firm's clients, the same client whose files the missing woman had been auditing before her disappearance. The connections were becoming impossible to ignore, yet they led to questions I wasn't sure I wanted answered. If she had discovered financial irregularities involving her own building's management company, who could she trust? Her supervisor had access to her work. Her neighbors might be complicit. Even the space she considered safe could be compromised. I tried calling the police detective assigned to her case, but he seemed dismissive of my findings. He insisted there was no evidence of foul play and suggested the woman had simply chosen to start a new life elsewhere. When I mentioned the mysterious phone messages and the fresh food in her apartment, he claimed these details weren't in his report and implied I might be mistaken about what I'd observed. His indifference felt deliberate, as if he'd been instructed not to pursue certain avenues of investigation. I began to wonder how deep this conspiracy might reach and whether my own inquiries had attracted unwanted attention. That suspicion was confirmed when I returned home to find my apartment subtly disturbed. Nothing was missing, but objects had been moved just enough to let me know someone had been there. My case files were still in their folder, but the pages were in a different order. My computer showed signs of being accessed, though I couldn't determine what information might have been copied or deleted. I realized I was now part of whatever web had ensnared the missing woman, and the thought terrified me more than I cared to admit. But I couldn't abandon the case, couldn't leave her sister without answers, couldn't ignore the growing certainty that something terrible had happened in that apartment. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, the building's maintenance worker, a quiet man who'd been employed there for over 20 years. He approached me as I was leaving one evening, glancing around nervously before pulling me into a service corridor. He told me about the building's hidden spaces, areas behind false walls where utilities ran and storage was tucked away. More importantly, he'd heard sounds coming from these spaces recently, sounds that reminded him of someone moving around where no one should be. He led me to a service panel I'd never noticed, concealed behind a decorative screen in the hallway. Beyond it lay a narrow passage that ran behind several apartments, including the missing woman's. The space was cramped and dusty, but clearly someone had been using it regularly. The dust was disturbed in a path leading from one end to the other. Halfway along this hidden corridor, we found something that made my stomach lurch: a sleeping bag, some empty food containers, and a small pile of photographs. The pictures showed the missing woman in her apartment, taken from angles that suggested the photographer had been watching her through hidden openings in the walls. But the most disturbing discovery was a notebook filled with detailed observations about her daily routine, her habits, her vulnerabilities. The handwriting was careful and methodical, documenting weeks of surveillance. The final entry was dated the day she disappeared and contained just 2 words: "It's time." The maintenance worker was as shaken as I was by what we'd found. He admitted he'd suspected someone was using the service areas, but had been afraid to investigate alone. Now he understood why we were looking at evidence of stalking that had likely escalated to something far worse. We called the police from my cell phone, but when the officers arrived, they seemed more interested in questioning our right to be in the service corridor than in examining the evidence we'd discovered. They collected the items with obvious reluctance and warned us about trespassing on private property. I knew then that my investigation had reached its limit. Whatever forces were protecting the person responsible for this woman's disappearance had resources and connections I couldn't match. The official channels were compromised, and my own safety was increasingly in question. But I couldn't let it end there. I owed her sister some form of closure, even if it wasn't the resolution either of us had hoped for. I arranged one final meeting, choosing a public place where we could speak freely without fear of surveillance. I told her what I'd found: the evidence of stalking, the financial connections, the official indifference that suggested a cover-up. I explained that her sister had likely discovered something that made her dangerous to powerful people, and that her disappearance was almost certainly not voluntary. The sister listened with tears streaming down her face, but also with a sense of relief that someone finally believed her instincts about what had happened. She thanked me for pursuing the truth even when it became dangerous, and we agreed that sometimes knowing is more important than proving. As I drove home that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. The headlights in my rearview mirror maintained the same distance for miles, turning when I turned, slowing when I slowed. I took several detours before finally losing my tail, but the message was clear: I was being watched, and my investigation had not gone unnoticed. I never learned what happened to the missing woman, whether she was killed or forced into hiding, whether she's still alive somewhere or buried in an unmarked grave. The case officially remains open but inactive, filed away with thousands of other unsolved disappearances that challenge no one's interests. But sometimes, late at night, I think about that apartment and wonder if someone else is sitting in that armchair now, facing the wall to avoid seeing what they've become part of. I wonder if the phone still rings with mysterious calls, if fresh food still appears in the refrigerator, if footsteps still pace overhead while the neighbors pretend not to hear. The truth is out there, hidden in plain sight like those service corridors behind false walls. It's protected by people with power and resources, people who understand that some secrets are worth killing for. And sometimes, in the quiet moments before sleep, I wonder if I'm still being watched, if my own apartment might one day stand empty with its own collection of unsettling details waiting to be discovered by the next investigator foolish enough to dig too deep. The ceiling fan in that abandoned apartment is probably still spinning, casting those same elongated shadows across the floor, waiting for someone to return and explain why the armchair faces the wall and what secrets are hidden in the spaces between. Story 8. The switch didn't respond beneath my fingers. There was a momentary hesitation as if the room considered its options, then settled back into darkness. I moved through the familiar layout, each step meeting a floor that felt softer than it should, like treading on muted echoes. My eyes chased shadows that clung stubbornly to the edges of my vision. The air seemed thicker, weighted and watching, wrapping around me with an unsettling familiarity. My hand reached out, expecting the cool solidity of the wall, but encountered only an indifferent smoothness. I paused, my pulse whispering in the quiet, as the space between me and the unseen blurred. The texture under my palm reminds me of something. A surface I touched months ago, weeks ago. Time has become unreliable in my memory. It was in that other room, the one where she kept her files, where the investigation began, or maybe where it ended. I can't be certain anymore. I remember her voice first, always her voice. You have to understand, this isn't about what we can prove. It's about what we can live with. She said this while sorting through photographs, black and white images spread across a metal desk like fallen leaves. I was standing behind her, close enough to smell the faint scent of her shampoo mixed with the staleness of the building's recycled air. The fluorescent light above us hummed with electrical uncertainty. But that was later or earlier. The sequence keeps shifting. The darkness around me now feels deliberate, chosen. I slide my hand along the wall, searching for the light switch I know should be there. My fingers find only that same smooth surface, uninterrupted and cool. The building's heating system whispers through hidden vents, a sound like distant conversation. I think about the first time I saw the file. It was thin, surprisingly thin for something that would consume so many of my sleeping hours. The cover was manila, unremarkable except for a small coffee stain in the upper right corner. Inside, 3 photographs and a single typewritten page. The page contained dates, addresses, and a list of items found at the scene. Nothing extraordinary, nothing that should have mattered. The photographs showed an empty room, walls painted an institutional shade of beige, a single window with blinds drawn, a chair positioned in the center, facing away from the camera. In the second photograph, the chair was turned slightly. In the third, it faced the camera directly. "Notice anything?" she asked me that first day. I studied the images, looking for what she wanted me to see. The chair appeared identical in each shot. The lighting was consistent. The angle of the camera remained the same. "The shadows," I said eventually. "Exactly." But I wasn't certain what I had noticed about the shadows. They seemed wrong somehow, falling in directions that didn't match the light source. Or maybe I was seeing patterns that weren't there. She had a way of making me question my own observations. My foot encounters something solid in the darkness. I bend down, my hand exploring the object. It's rectangular, smooth on one side, textured on the other. A book, I think, though it feels too light. I lift it and pages flutter in the still air like moth wings. The rustling sound brings back another memory. We were in the archive room, pulling files from boxes that hadn't been opened in years. Dust motes danced in the afternoon sunlight streaming through high windows. She was reading from a report, her voice steady and professional. Subject was discovered at approximately 3:15 in the afternoon. Door was locked from the inside. No signs of struggle, no note. I remember asking about the chair, why it had been moved between photographs. Different days, she explained. The scene was photographed multiple times over several weeks. Why? She looked at me then, and I saw something in her expression I couldn't interpret. Uncertainty, maybe, or recognition. Because someone kept going back. The book in my hands feels familiar. I run my fingers along its spine, feeling for raised letters or numbers. The darkness makes identification impossible, but the weight and texture suggest something official. A manual perhaps, or a collection of procedures. I remember her showing me another file, this one much thicker. It contained reports spanning several months, all related to the same location. Different incidents, different people, but always that same room with the chair. The pattern wasn't immediately obvious. It took weeks of cross-referencing to see the connections. Look at the dates, she said, spreading the reports across her desk. I studied the paperwork, noting the intervals between incidents. Roughly 30 days apart, sometimes 28, occasionally 32. Almost regular, but not quite, like a heartbeat with an irregular rhythm. What do you think it means? I think, she said carefully, that someone was keeping a schedule. But whose schedule and for what purpose? These questions followed me home, infiltrated my dreams, made me question the reliability of my own memories. I began to notice patterns everywhere, in the arrangement of furniture in my apartment, in the timing of phone calls, in the way shadows fell across my floor at different times of day. The book slips from my fingers and falls to the floor with a soft thud. The sound echoes strangely in the enclosed space, as if the room is larger than I remember, or smaller. Spatial relationships have become negotiable. I think about the last conversation we had. It was in her office, late in the evening. The building was mostly empty, and our voices seemed to carry farther than they should have. I've been thinking about the chair, I said. What about it? In the photographs, it's always facing the camera in the final shot. She nodded slowly, as if someone arranged it that way. For the photographer, or for whoever would see the photographs later. This possibility had occurred to me as well. The idea that the scenes were being staged, not for the initial investigators, but for future observers. For us, perhaps. The thought was unsettling in ways I couldn't articulate. Do you think we're seeing what we're supposed to see? I asked. Her answer came after a long pause. I think we're seeing what someone wants us to see. Whether that's what we're supposed to see is a different question. The distinction felt important, though I couldn't explain why. I moved forward in the darkness, my hands extended like a sleepwalker's. The air currents shift around me, suggesting the presence of walls or furniture. My fingertips brush against something vertical and solid, a door frame, perhaps, or the edge of a cabinet. The texture reminds me of the surfaces in that other room, the one we visited together, following lights that seemed to dissipate as soon as we grasped them. It was in an older building, the kind where corridors branch unpredictably, and room numbers follow no logical sequence. "This is it," she said, consulting a small notebook. The door was unmarked, painted the same institutional beige as the walls. She produced a key from her pocket, and I wondered how she had obtained it. The lock turned with surprising ease. Inside, the room was exactly as it had appeared in the photographs. The chair sat in the center, facing the door as if expecting visitors. The walls were bare except for a small mirror positioned at eye level. The window blinds were drawn, filtering the daylight into thin horizontal lines. "How does it feel?" she asked. I considered the question. The room felt familiar, though I was certain I had never been there before. It felt like a place I had dreamed about or remembered from childhood, though neither explanation made sense. "Staged," I said finally. "Exactly. But staged for what and by whom?" We spent an hour in that room, documenting everything we could observe. The chair was positioned precisely in the center, as if measured. The mirror reflected the chair at an angle that seemed deliberate. The drawn blinds created a pattern of light and shadow that reminded me of prison bars. When we left, I noticed she locked the door behind us. I asked if she had permission to be there. "Permission from whom?" she replied. It was a good question. The building directory listed the room as unoccupied, no tenant, no official purpose. Yet someone was maintaining it, keeping it exactly as it appeared in the photographs. My hand finds what feels like a light switch. I press it hopefully, but nothing happens. The darkness remains complete, almost tangible. I wonder if the power has been cut or if the bulbs have been removed. Both possibilities seem equally likely. I remember the conversation we had about patterns. It was during one of our late-night sessions, when the investigation had become more obsession than profession. "What if we're looking at this wrong?" I suggested. "How do you mean?" "What if the pattern isn't in the incidents themselves, but in how they're being documented?" She leaned back in her chair, considering. "You think someone is manipulating the records?" "I think someone is creating the records, manufacturing the pattern we're trying to solve." This idea had been growing in my mind for weeks. The more we investigated, the more convenient the evidence seemed. Files appeared exactly when we needed them. Witnesses provided information that confirmed our theories. Even the room itself had been accessible at precisely the right moment. "But why?" she asked. "Maybe to see how we would respond, to test our methods or our assumptions." "You think we're being studied?" The possibility felt both paranoid and logical. Our investigation had attracted attention from the beginning. Phone calls from unknown numbers, requests for progress reports from supervisors who claimed no knowledge of our work. The sense that our movements were being monitored, our conclusions anticipated. "I think," I said carefully, "that we might be part of the pattern." Her expression changed then. Something closed off in her face, as if she had decided not to share a thought that had occurred to her. "What is it?" I asked. "Nothing, just tired." But I could see it wasn't nothing. She had realized something, made a connection I hadn't seen, and she had chosen not to tell me. The floor beneath my feet changes texture, carpet now instead of hard surface. The pile is short and industrial, the kind used in office buildings and institutions. My steps are muffled, creating a sense of moving through cotton or fog. I think about the last time I saw her. It was in the parking structure beneath the building where we had been working. She was standing beside her car, keys in her hand, looking at something I couldn't see. "Are you all right?" I called out. She turned toward me, and I noticed she was holding a manila folder, the same type that had contained our original case file. "I found something," she said. "What kind of something?" She hesitated, glancing around the empty garage, evidence that we were right about being part of the pattern. "Can I see it?" "Not here, meet me tomorrow, same place, same time." But when I arrived the next day, she wasn't there. The office was empty, her desk cleared of personal items. The files we had been working on were gone. Even the coffee stain on the original folder had been erased from my memory until this moment. I asked about her whereabouts, but received conflicting information. Some people said she had been transferred. Others claimed she had never worked there at all. One supervisor insisted that I had been working alone from the beginning. "There's no record of a partner being assigned to this case," he said, consulting a computer screen. "But I have notes, conversations, shared observations. Sometimes when people work alone for extended periods, they create internal dialogues. It's not uncommon." His explanation felt rehearsed, as if he had given it before. I wondered how many other investigators had stood in his office, asking about missing partners and disappeared evidence. My hand encounters another surface. This one is metallic and cool, with a slight vibration that suggests machinery or electrical equipment. I press my ear against it and hear a low humming, like the sound of a refrigerator or air conditioning unit. The sound reminds me of the archive room, where we had spent so many hours reviewing files. There was a large air conditioning unit that cycled on and off throughout the day, creating a rhythm that became the soundtrack to our investigation. I remember finding a file that seemed different from the others. The paper was newer, the typeface slightly different. It contained a report about our own investigation, written as if by an outside observer. Subject demonstrates increasing paranoia regarding the authenticity of evidence. Shows tendency to question the reliability of documentation and the motives of colleagues. I had shown the file to her, expecting surprise or concern. Instead, she had nodded as if she had been expecting it. "They're documenting us," she said. "Who is they?" "Whoever set this up, whoever wants to see how far we'll go." "What do you mean, how far we'll go?" She looked at me then with an expression I couldn't read. Pity, perhaps, or recognition. "How far we'll go to find a truth that might not exist." The vibration under my hand stops suddenly, leaving a silence that feels absolute. No electrical humming, no air circulation, no distant sounds of traffic or human activity. The quiet is so complete it seems to press against my eardrums. I think about the question that had been bothering me throughout the investigation. If someone was manipulating the evidence, creating patterns for us to discover, what was the ultimate purpose? What were they hoping to achieve? The answer, when it came to me, was both simple and disturbing. They weren't trying to achieve anything external. They were studying the process itself, how investigators respond to ambiguous evidence, how patterns emerge from random data when observers are motivated to find them, how reality becomes negotiable when documentation is unreliable. We hadn't been investigating a case. We had been participating in an experiment. But if that was true, what did it mean about her disappearance? Was it part of the design, another variable to be tested? Or had she discovered something that made her participation unnecessary? I remember the last thing she said to me in the parking garage. She had been holding that manila folder, looking at something I couldn't see. I found evidence that we were right about being part of the pattern. What if the evidence hadn't been about our investigation being monitored? What if it had been about something else entirely? What if she had discovered that one of us wasn't who we claimed to be? My foot encounters something soft and yielding. I kneel down and explore with my hands. It feels like fabric, possibly clothing. A jacket or coat lying crumpled on the floor. I lift it carefully, noting its weight and texture. The material feels familiar, will blend with a slight roughness that suggests frequent wear. There's a faint scent clinging to the fabric, something floral and subtle, like the shampoo I remembered from our work sessions. But that's impossible. She had been wearing this jacket the last time I saw her. I remember it clearly now, the way it hung slightly loose on her shoulders, the small tear near the left pocket that she had mentioned wanting to repair. I search the pockets and find a small notebook, the same one she had consulted when we visited the room with the chair. My fingers trace the spiral binding, feeling for the pages I know should be there. The notebook is empty. Not blank, but empty. The pages have been removed, leaving only the perforated edges where they had been torn away. Someone has taken the contents but left the cover, like a shell with the organism removed. I think about the conversation we had about memory and documentation. It was during one of our evening sessions, when the investigation had begun to feel like a meditation on the nature of evidence itself. How do we know what we remember is accurate? I had asked. We don't, she replied. Memory is reconstruction, not playback. Every time we remember something, we change it slightly. So our investigation could be based on false memories. Our investigation could be creating false memories. The distinction had seemed important at the time, though I couldn't articulate why. Now, holding the empty notebook in the darkness, I understand what she meant. The act of investigation changes the thing being investigated. The observer affects the observed. Reality becomes a collaboration between what happened and what we decide happened. But if that's true, how can I trust my memory of her? How can I be certain she existed at all, rather than being a projection of my own need for partnership and validation? The questions multiply faster than I can answer them. Each doubt creates new uncertainties, like cracks spreading through glass. I wonder if this is what she experienced in those final days when she began to seem distant and preoccupied. The darkness around me feels different now, less like an absence of light and more like a presence of something else. I can sense boundaries and surfaces without seeing them, as if the space has its own logic that doesn't require visual confirmation. I remember the mirror in that room, how it reflected the chair at an angle that seemed deliberate. What if the mirror hadn't been positioned to show the chair, but to show whoever was observing the chair? What if we had been looking at ourselves without realizing it? The thought creates a sensation like vertigo. I reach out for support and find another wall, another smooth surface that offers no texture or variation. My hand moves along it, searching for some landmark or reference point. Instead, I find another light switch. This one responds to my touch, but the illumination it provides is wrong somehow. Too dim, too warm, casting shadows that seem to move independently of their sources. The room I see is not the one I expected. It's the room from the photographs. The chair sits in the center, facing me directly. The walls are painted that same institutional beige. The window blinds are drawn, creating those familiar bars of light and shadow. But I'm not supposed to be here. This room is part of the investigation, part of the pattern we were trying to understand. I'm supposed to be somewhere else, somewhere safe and separate from the evidence. Unless I was never separate from it at all. I approach the chair slowly, noting its position and orientation. It's exactly as it appeared in the final photograph, turned to face the observer. The seat is worn smooth, as if from frequent use. The back shows scratches and scuff marks that suggest a long history. On the seat lies a manila folder. I recognize it immediately, though I know that's impossible. It's the original case file, the one that started our investigation. The coffee stain is in the upper right corner, exactly as I remember, but the file had disappeared along with everything else related to our work. I open it carefully, expecting to find the same 3 photographs and single typewritten page. Instead, there are dozens of documents, reports, notes, transcripts of conversations, all related to our investigation, but written from the perspective of someone observing us. The handwriting in the margins is hers. Subject shows increasing integration with the experimental framework. One note reads, "Boundary between observer and observed becoming permeable." Another, memory reconstruction proceeding as expected. Subject beginning to question the reliability of their own experiences. And finally, recommend transition to next phase. Subject ready for direct participation. I understand now what she had discovered in that parking garage. Not that we were being observed, but that one of us was doing the observing. She hadn't been my partner in the investigation. She had been my investigator. But if that's true, where is she now? And why has she left me here in this room that shouldn't exist, with evidence of my own manipulation? The answer comes to me slowly, like a photograph developing in chemical baths. She hasn't left me here. She has brought me here. This is the next phase she wrote about, the transition from observation to participation. I am no longer investigating the pattern. I have become part of it. The chair waits for me, positioned precisely in the center of the room. I understand now why it faces the observer in every final photograph. It's not arranged for the camera. It's arranged for the next subject, the next participant in whatever experiment this has become. I sit down carefully, feeling the worn smoothness of the seat conform to my body. The position offers a clear view of the mirror on the wall, which reflects my image back at an angle that seems deliberate. I wonder who will see this reflection, who will study the photographs that document my participation. The room settles around me like a familiar embrace. The shadows fall in directions that no longer seem wrong. The air moves with currents that feel natural and necessary. Even the silence has weight and purpose. I think about her final question, the one she asked in the parking garage but never had the chance to answer. What evidence had she found that proved we were part of the pattern? The evidence was me, my willingness to follow leads that led nowhere, my readiness to see patterns in random data, my need for partnership and validation that made me accept her presence without questioning her credentials or motivations. I had been selected for this role, prepared for it through careful manipulation of my environment and experiences. The investigation had been designed to bring me to this moment, this room, this chair. But knowing this doesn't diminish the reality of what I experienced. The conversations were real, even if they served a different purpose than I understood. The evidence was authentic, even if it was artificially arranged. The partnership was genuine, even if it was asymmetrical. The boundaries between truth and manipulation have become irrelevant. What matters is the experience itself, the process of discovery and understanding that brought me here. I close my eyes and listen to the silence. Somewhere in the building, machinery hums with electrical certainty. Air moves through hidden passages, carrying scents and sounds from distant rooms. Time passes in increments that feel both measured and eternal. When I open my eyes, the room looks different, not changed exactly, but more itself. The shadows have depth and purpose. The mirror reflects not just my image, but something essential about the space and my place within it. I understand now that I will remain here in this chair until the next phase begins, until someone else follows the same carefully arranged clues, asks the same carefully prompted questions, experiences the same carefully orchestrated revelations. The pattern continues, expanding to include new participants while maintaining its essential structure. Each iteration adds complexity while preserving the fundamental design. The experiment evolves but never concludes. I think about the person who will eventually find me here. They will see the chair positioned to face them directly, as if arranged by someone who understood their needs and expectations. They will study the room, document its contents, search for patterns in the evidence. They will find a partner to assist in their investigation, someone knowledgeable and supportive, someone who asks the right questions at the right moments, someone who helps them see connections they might otherwise miss. And eventually they will discover what I have discovered, that the investigation was never about solving a mystery external to themselves. It was about understanding their own capacity for meaning-making, their own willingness to participate in patterns that exceed their comprehension. The cycle will continue, each iteration adding new layers while preserving the essential structure. The room will remain, the chair will wait, the pattern will expand to include new participants. I settle more deeply into the seat, feeling its contours accommodate my presence. The position is comfortable, almost familiar, as if I have been preparing for this moment throughout my entire investigation. Outside, beyond the drawn blinds, the world continues its own patterns and cycles. But inside this room, time has a different quality. Here, the investigation never ends. It simply transforms, including new elements while maintaining its essential purpose. I think about her one last time, wondering where she is now and what role she plays in the larger design. Perhaps she is observing from somewhere beyond my perception. Perhaps she has moved on to investigate other subjects, other patterns, other questions about the nature of truth and observation. Or perhaps she never existed at all, except as a projection of my own need for partnership and validation. Perhaps I conducted the entire investigation alone, creating dialogues and conversations to structure my own process of discovery. The distinction no longer matters. What matters is the understanding I have gained, the recognition of my place within patterns that exceed my individual comprehension. The investigation has achieved its purpose, even if that purpose was different from what I originally understood. The room breathes around me, settling into its eternal patience. The chair supports my weight with practiced ease. The mirror reflects my image back at angles that reveal new perspectives on familiar realities. I close my eyes again and listen to the silence. In that quiet space, I can hear the echo of future footsteps, future voices, future questions that will bring new participants to this same moment of recognition. The pattern continues, the investigation expands. The truth reveals itself through process rather than conclusion, through participation rather than observation. And I remain here in this chair in this room, part of the evidence that will guide the next investigator toward their own inevitable understanding. The darkness returns, but it no longer feels like absence. It feels like potential, like the space between questions where answers take shape. It feels like home, story 9. The gentle swish of the curtain barely disturbed the afternoon stillness, casting a fleeting shadow across the floor. The room had the faint aroma of freshly cut grass sneaking in from the open window. On the wall, a grandfather clock whispered its steady rhythm, but it wasn't the watch's hand that caught attention. The needlepoint frame above the mantel hung askew, revealing a sliver of bright, untouched paint. A chill lingered longer than the summer breeze, hinting at a secret the walls might soon reveal. I keep coming back to that frame, the way it tilted just so, like someone had brushed against it in passing, or maybe grabbed at it. I can't be sure anymore. The memory starts there in that room with the grass smell and the ticking. But it doesn't stay put. It slides around, changes shape. Sometimes the curtain is blue. Sometimes there's no curtain at all, just bare glass reflecting something I can't quite see. You weren't supposed to be here. That voice, whose voice, it comes from nowhere, cuts through the reconstruction like a blade through fabric. I was supposed to be somewhere else that afternoon, doing something else. But what? The frame keeps pulling me back, needlepoint work, delicate stitches forming a pattern I should recognize. Flowers, maybe, or birds, the kind of things she used to make, sitting in that chair by the window, fingers moving with practiced precision. I see, who was she? The shadow moves again, but this time it's not the curtain. This time it's a figure crossing the room just at the edge of my vision. When I turn to look directly, there's nothing, just the lingering scent of something floral, perfume maybe, or soap. I was holding something in my hand, something small and warm, a key, a button. The texture was smooth against my palm, but when I try to picture it now, my fingers close around empty air. This changes everything. Another voice, or the same voice with different words. The reconstruction fractures here, splits into parallel possibilities. In one version, I'm standing by the mantel, reaching toward that crooked frame. In another, I'm sitting in the chair, watching someone else move through the space like a ghost. The clock kept ticking through it all. Steady, relentless marking moments that felt suspended in amber. But clocks can lie, can't they? Time isn't always what it seems. There was a sound from upstairs, footsteps maybe, or something heavier dragging across the floor. I looked up at the ceiling, following the noise as it moved from one end of the house to the other. Then silence. The grass smell grew stronger. Not just cut grass now, but something earthier. Soil, damp earth after rain, but it hadn't been raining that afternoon, had it? I touched the frame, I remember that much. My fingers found the corner where it had shifted, tried to straighten it back into place. But underneath, where the paint was bright and untouched, there were marks, scratches in the wall, deliberate lines like someone had been keeping count. You can't tell anyone. The voice again, closer now, urgent, but tell anyone what? The scratches, the tilted frame, the sound from upstairs that might not have been footsteps at all. The chair by the window was still warm when I sat in it, as if someone had just gotten up, just stepped away for a moment. The needlepoint work was there too, half finished, the needle still threaded and waiting, but the pattern made no sense. What I'd thought were flowers looked more like symbols. What I'd taken for birds might have been letters. Or numbers. The shadow moved again. This time I was ready for it, turned quickly enough to catch a glimpse of something retreating toward the hallway. A figure in pale clothing, moving with careful steps, familiar steps. But familiar how, from where? The small object was still in my hand, growing warmer against my skin. When I finally looked down at it, really looked, I saw it wasn't a key or a button at all. It was smooth and white like polished bone, with tiny holes drilled through it in a pattern I couldn't decipher. The grandfather clock chimed, though I don't remember what hour it marked. The sound seemed to come from very far away, as if the room had suddenly grown larger or I had grown smaller. The walls stretched, the ceiling lifted, and the tilted frame became just one small detail in a vast expanse of secrets. I stood up from the chair and the needlepoint work fell to the floor. The needle caught the light from the window, flashed once like a signal, then disappeared into the shadows between the floorboards. It's too late now. But too late for what? The voice was fading, becoming part of the ambient sound of the house. The settling timber, the whisper of air through cracks in the foundation, the distant hum of something mechanical running in another room. I walked to the window, looked out at the lawn where the grass had been cut in neat, parallel lines. But there were other lines too, darker ones, as if the earth itself had been disturbed. Rectangular shapes that might have been flower beds, or might have been something else entirely. The frame watched me from the mantel, still crooked, still revealing that bright strip of hidden wall. The scratches underneath seemed to multiply as I stared at them, or maybe my eyes were just learning to see what had always been there. I turned back to the room and it was different, smaller again. The curtain was moving, but there was no breeze. The clock had stopped ticking, though the hands still moved in their endless circle, and the chair by the window was empty, but somehow still warm. The object in my hand was gone. Had I dropped it, hidden it, given it to someone? The absence felt heavier than the presence had been, like a hole in the fabric of the memory itself. You understand now. The voice was my own this time, or maybe it had always been my own voice, speaking words I didn't remember thinking, understanding things I didn't remember learning. The needlepoint work was back on the chair, though I hadn't picked it up. The pattern was clearer now, or maybe I was finally seeing it correctly. Not flowers or birds or letters, something else. Something that made my chest tight and my breathing shallow. The shadow moved one more time, but now I didn't turn to follow it. I knew what I would see, or rather what I wouldn't see. The absence that had been there all along, waiting for me to stop looking for what wasn't there and start seeing what was. The grass smell faded, replaced by something else, something that reminded me of closed spaces and forgotten things, the kind of smell that clings to objects left too long in dark places. I reached for the frame again, but this time my hand stopped just short of touching it, because now I could see what the scratches really were, not random marks or counting lines. They were letters spelling out something I wasn't ready to read. The curtain moved again, casting that familiar shadow across the floor, but the shadow was wrong now, shaped like something that shouldn't have been there, something that couldn't have been there. Unless... The clock started ticking again, but the rhythm was different, faster or maybe just more insistent, marking time that had already passed or time that was running out. I sat back down in the chair and the needlepoint work was in my hands again. My fingers knew the pattern, knew where each stitch belonged, as if I had been the one making it all along, as if I had been the one sitting in this chair, watching the room, waiting for something to happen. Or waiting for someone to remember. The frame tilted a little more, revealing another strip of bright paint, more scratches underneath, more letters that spelled out more words I didn't want to read. But I was reading them anyway. My eyes were tracing the lines. My mind was putting together the message that had been hidden there all along. The message that explained the warm chair and the moving shadows and the sound from upstairs that wasn't footsteps. The gentle swish of the curtain barely disturbed the afternoon stillness, casting a fleeting shadow across the floor. But now I know what made that shadow. Now I understand why the frame hung askew, why the paint underneath was bright and untouched. Why I keep coming back to this room, this memory, this moment when everything changed and nothing was ever the same again. The needlepoint frame watches from the mantel, holding its secrets behind crooked glass. And I sit in the chair by the window, stitching patterns that might be flowers or birds or something else entirely, waiting for the next shadow to cross the floor. Waiting for the next person to notice that something isn't quite right about the way the light falls in this room, the way the air holds its breath, the way the walls keep their secrets, carved in careful lines beneath frames that hang just slightly askew. The clock ticks on, marking moments that fold back on themselves like origami made of time and memory. And the curtain moves, casting shadows that shouldn't exist in a room where nothing is quite what it seems. Including me, story 10. I always walked past the fifth doorway on my way back home. It stood inconspicuous among the row of identical doorways, each marked by a simple brass number. This one bore the number 5, slightly worn and tarnished. For months, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. The scuff marks on the welcome mat were always in the same place, the door always slightly ajar as if left by mistake. But last Tuesday, the mat was askew, a small thing yet unfamiliar. Yesterday the door was shut tight, no hint of the casual negligence I'd grown accustomed to. I wondered if I'd missed something all along. Now today there is a new keyhole. It's so small, almost imperceptible, but I'm sure it wasn't there before. The thing is, I know what happened behind that door. I've known for weeks now, ever since I started paying real attention to the patterns. The woman who lives there lived there. She had a routine. Every morning at the same time, she would prop the door open just enough to let air circulate through her apartment. The building gets stuffy, especially during the warmer months. She was methodical about it, the kind of person who did things the same way every single day. She disappeared on a Sunday. I'm certain of this because Sunday was the day she would sweep her mat, always leaving those same 3 scuff marks in precisely the same arrangement. The marks came from how she positioned her feet while unlocking the door, left foot slightly forward, right foot planted firmly behind. I watched her do it countless times from my own doorway across the hall. The police came and went. They asked the standard questions, took their notes, and filed their reports. Missing person case, they called it, probably moved away without telling anyone, they suggested. People do that sometimes, they said, start fresh somewhere new, but I knew better. I knew she would never leave that door propped open by accident. She was too careful, too precise. The landlord changed the locks afterward. That's what landlords do when tenants disappear without paying rent. Standard procedure. I watched him install the new hardware, a simple deadbolt to replace the old one. Nothing fancy, just basic security. The work took him maybe 20 minutes. But now there's this second keyhole, and that changes everything. I first noticed it when the afternoon light hit the door at just the right angle. a tiny circle of shadow where there should have been smooth wood. So small I almost convinced myself it was a natural flaw in the grain, maybe a knot that had fallen out over time. But knots don't form perfect circles, and knots don't appear overnight. I've been standing here for 10 minutes now, staring at that door, and the longer I look, the less sense any of this makes. The new keyhole is positioned exactly where someone would install a peephole, except it goes all the way through. I can see light coming from the other side, which means the apartment isn't empty like everyone assumes. The scuff marks on the mat are wrong too. I thought I remembered them perfectly, but looking at them now, they're arranged differently than I described to the police. The pattern is more scattered, less deliberate, like someone was struggling instead of simply unlocking a door. I'm starting to wonder if I ever really watched her morning routine as carefully as I believed. Memory has a way of filling in details that might not have been there, creating patterns where only randomness existed. Maybe the door was never propped open deliberately. Maybe it was just a warped frame that wouldn't close properly. But that doesn't explain the keyhole. I walked back to my own apartment and retrieved the small flashlight I keep in my kitchen drawer. The hallway was empty. It usually is during the afternoon hours when most residents are at work. The building has thin walls and sound travels easily, so I moved quietly as I approached the fifth door again. Kneeling down, I positioned the flashlight beam directly at the mysterious keyhole. The light passed through cleanly, illuminating a small circle on the opposite wall of the hallway. Definitely a hole, definitely new. But as I shifted the angle slightly, trying to see into the apartment, something blocked the light from the other side. Something moved. I pulled back instinctively, my heart rate jumping. After a moment I tried again, but whatever had been there was gone. The light passed through unobstructed, revealing nothing but the familiar beige wall of an empty apartment. Standing up, I noticed my hands were shaking slightly. Not from fear exactly, but from a growing uncertainty about what I thought I knew. The woman who lived here, I realized now, I never actually spoke to her, never learned her name, never heard her voice. All my knowledge about her routine came from observation, from assumptions I made while watching from across the hall. What if I was wrong about everything? I started thinking about the morning she disappeared. I remember being awakened by a sound, a thud, like something heavy falling. At the time, I assumed it came from the apartment above mine. Old buildings make noise, and I'd grown accustomed to the various creaks and bumps that came with living in a structure built decades ago. But what if the sound came from across the hall instead? The police asked me about that morning, and I told them I hadn't heard anything unusual. I was certain of this when I gave my statement. The building was quiet, I said, nothing out of the ordinary. But now, replaying the memory, I can hear that thud clearly. It was sharp, sudden, and definitely came from the direction of the fifth door. Why didn't I remember this before? I went back to my apartment and found the business card the detective had given me. I should call him, tell him about the keyhole, tell him about the sound I now remember hearing. But what would I say? That I found a small hole in a door and suddenly recalled details that contradicted my previous statement, that I've been watching my neighbor's apartment obsessively for weeks. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table and tried to reconstruct everything I thought I knew. The woman's routine, her disappearance, the condition of her door and mat. The more I focused on specific details, the more they seemed to shift and blur. I remembered her as being tall, but now I wasn't sure. Maybe she was average height, and I only thought she was tall because I usually saw her from a distance. Her hair was dark, I was certain of that, but when I tried to picture her face, I couldn't bring any features into focus. Had I ever actually seen her face? The realization hit me like a physical blow. In all my observations, in all the times I watched her unlock her door and adjust her mat, I don't think she ever turned in my direction. I saw her from behind, from the side, but never straight on, never clearly enough to identify her in a lineup or even describe her to a sketch artist. So who exactly had disappeared? I returned to the hallway, but this time I approached the fourth door instead of the fifth. The mat here was clean, precisely positioned, no scuff marks at all. The door was painted the same color, had the same brass number, the same basic layout, but something about it felt different. The sixth door was identical as well, except for small variations in wear patterns and the style of the doorknob. Each apartment had its own subtle character, its own minor imperfections that developed over time. But as I looked at them all together, 4, 5, and 6, I realized I couldn't definitively say which one I'd been watching all those months. The hallway was longer than I remembered, with more doors than seemed right. The lighting was dimmer, making the brass numbers harder to read. I counted them twice to be sure. 7 doors total on this side of the hallway, not 6 like I'd always assumed. The 5th door was in the middle, but it wasn't the one I'd been focused on. That door, the one with the scuff marks and the new keyhole, was actually the 4th. Or maybe the 6th. The numbers seemed to shift slightly each time I looked at them, as if they weren't quite fixed in place. I felt dizzy suddenly, like the floor was tilting beneath my feet. Nothing about this hallway matched my mental map of the building. The distances were wrong, the proportions were off, and I couldn't locate my own apartment door from where I was standing. How long had I been living here? The lease agreement was in my apartment somewhere, but I couldn't recall signing it. I couldn't remember moving in, couldn't remember choosing this building or this particular unit. The memories should have been there, but they weren't. What I could remember was watching that door, learning those patterns, becoming invested in the routine of someone I'd never met. But if I couldn't even identify which door I'd been watching, how could I trust any of my observations? The keyhole was still there, still perfectly round, still allowing light to pass through. I knelt down again and peered inside, hoping to see something that would anchor me back to what I thought was reality. The apartment beyond was furnished, not empty like everyone claimed, but actively lived in. I could see a coffee cup on a small table, steam rising from the surface. A newspaper folded open to a page I couldn't read from this angle. A pair of shoes placed neatly by what must have been the entrance to another room. Someone was home. I knocked softly on the door, 3 gentle taps that wouldn't alarm anyone inside. No response. I tried again, a little louder this time. Still nothing. But through the keyhole, I watched the steam continue rising from that coffee cup. Fresh coffee, recently poured. Someone had been there moments ago. "Hello," I called out, keeping my voice low enough not to disturb the other residents. "I live across the hall. I just wanted to check on things." The silence stretched on, but it felt different now. Not the silence of an empty space, but the deliberate quiet of someone choosing not to respond, someone listening. I pressed my ear to the door and heard the faint sound of breathing. Slow, controlled, like someone trying very hard not to make noise. The person inside knew I was there. "I know you're home," I said, still speaking softly. "I'm not trying to cause trouble. I just want to understand what happened." The breathing stopped. I waited for several minutes, but heard nothing else. When I looked through the keyhole again, the coffee cup was gone. The newspaper had been moved. The shoes were no longer visible. But I hadn't heard footsteps, hadn't heard any movement at all. Walking back to what I believed was my apartment, I found the door unlocked. I never left it unlocked. I was obsessive about security, always checking the deadbolt twice before leaving for any reason. But the handle turned easily, and I stepped inside without needing my key. The layout was wrong. The kitchen was on the left instead of the right. The living room window faced the wrong direction. The furniture was similar to what I remembered owning, but not identical. Close enough to seem familiar, but different enough to feel unsettling. I searched for my lease agreement, for any documentation that would confirm my identity and my right to be in this space. The papers I found had my name on them, but the apartment number was different from what I expected. According to these documents, I lived in Unit 4. But I'd always lived in Unit 7, I was sure of that. Or maybe I lived in Unit 6. The more I thought about it, the less certain I became. I went to the window and looked out at the view I'd seen countless times before, but the angle was wrong, the perspective shifted. The building across the street looked different, taller somehow. The street itself seemed narrower. Everything was almost right, but not quite. I realized then that I might be the one who disappeared, that the person I'd been watching, the woman with the careful routine and the precisely placed scuff marks, might have been watching me in return, learning my patterns, noting my habits, becoming concerned when those patterns suddenly changed. Maybe she was the one who called the police. Maybe she was the one who gave statements about her missing neighbor. Maybe she was the one standing in the hallway right now, staring at a door that should have been mine, wondering about a keyhole that shouldn't exist. The coffee cup with the rising steam, maybe that was mine. Maybe I'd been sitting at that table, reading that newspaper, living in that apartment all along. Maybe what I thought was observation was actually memory, fragments of my own routine seen from an impossible perspective. But if that's true, then who am I now, and whose apartment am I standing in? I walked to the mirror in what I assumed was my bathroom. The face looking back at me was familiar, but not quite right. The features were mine, but arranged slightly differently. The eyes were the same color, but set a little closer together. The mouth had the same shape, but seemed smaller somehow. It was like looking at a photograph of myself that had been subtly altered, changed just enough to create doubt about what I actually looked like. I touched the mirror and my reflection touched back, but there was a delay, just a fraction of a second, but enough to notice. Enough to make me question whether I was looking at a reflection at all, or through another keyhole into another apartment where someone who looked almost exactly like me was touching their side of the glass. The woman who disappeared, maybe she didn't disappear at all. Maybe she just moved from one apartment to another, from one side of the keyhole to the other. Maybe we all did, shifting positions in some elaborate arrangement that none of us fully understood. Maybe the building itself was the mystery, and we were all just players moving through it, watching each other through tiny holes in doors, creating stories about disappearances and routines and patterns that might not mean anything at all. I'm still standing here looking at this face that might be mine, in this apartment that might be home, thinking about that keyhole that definitely exists but probably shouldn't. And I can hear breathing again, coming from somewhere very close by, slow and controlled, like someone trying very hard not to make noise. But I can't tell if it's coming from the other side of the wall or from my own lungs.